Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into the US-Iran conflict, but we're looking at it through a lens that might just flip everything you think you know on its head. There's an expert analysis out there that argues America's greatest strength, its military might, has actually become its biggest weakness, backing the US into a strategic trap with no clear way out. So let's get into it.
Right off the bat, here is the central, shocking claim from military strategist Professor Robert Pape. He says that everything the U.S. has done has had the opposite effect. Instead of crippling Iran, U.S. actions have, in his words, made it stronger. Now, how is that even possible? Well, that paradox is exactly what we're going to unpack.
So to really understand how we got to this point, we first have to look at a huge, fundamental miscalculation, one that essentially turned America's overwhelming power against its own goals.
And look, this isn't just some academic theory. This analysis comes from someone who knows the U.S. military playbook inside and out. Professor Robert Pape from the University of Chicago spent over 2 decades running war game simulations for the military itself, modeling this exact scenario, a massive U.S. bombing campaign against Iran.
So what did all those years of modeling show? Well, Professor Pape's work kept pointing to the same conclusion, something he calls the bombing paradox. It's a situation where America's biggest advantage, its incredible air power, actually becomes a strategic liability.
And here's the absolute heart of the paradox. Yes, the U.S. can hit thousands of targets. Bombs are great at destroying buildings. But that tactical success, hitting all those targets, doesn't actually lead to winning. In fact, it does the opposite. It tends to unify the population against you and make the regime even more determined to fight back.
This is such a brilliant way to understand the problem with bombing Iran's nuclear program. Pape calls it the pan versus gold analogy. You can bomb the facility, that's the pan. You can blow it to bits. But you can't destroy the actual enriched uranium, that's the gold. It's a chemical element. It survives the explosion. And all Iran has to do is sift through the rubble, collect the gold, and start over.
And what's wild is that Iran basically prepared for this exact move. They built their most important weapons, their drones and missiles, in arsenals buried deep underground where bombs can't reach them. So the US can level everything on the surface, but it can't touch that last critical 10 to 20% of Iran's firepower. And as we learned in past conflicts, if you can't get that last 20%, the enemy believes they can't be beaten.
So because the bombing campaign fails to achieve its ultimate goal, it forces the United States to a critical tipping point. Professor Pape calls this a fork in the road, an escalation trap where there's really no going back to the way things were.
And this is so important to grasp. The old status quo is gone. It's off the table. The bombing has permanently altered the strategic map, and now, according to the model, the U.S. is stuck staring down 2 and only 2 possible futures.
And neither of them are good. Path A is a full-blown ground war, a massive, bloody invasion to physically seize the nuclear material. We're talking a conflict that would last months, maybe years. Path B is to pull back, which basically means accepting that Iran has won. It would control the region, almost certainly get a nuclear bomb, and team up with Russia and China to form a powerful new anti-American bloc. Okay, so let's really dig into that second path for a minute, because the fallout from that choice isn't just about the Middle East. It has the potential to completely redraw the global balance of power. This is where it starts to affect everyone.
It really starts with this one number, 20%. A full 1/5 of the entire world's oil supply has to pass through one tiny choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. And by proving it can disrupt shipping there whenever it wants, Iran now has a hand on the throat of the global economy.
But it gets even scarier. What happens if Iran, with its control over that 20%, officially partners up with Russia, which controls about another 10% of the world's oil? Well, suddenly you have a new bloc that can manipulate almost 1/3 of the global supply. They could hold the U.S. and Europe's economies hostage, and there'd be very little anyone could do about it.
And we are already seeing the dominoes start to fall. U.S. allies in Asia, like Japan and India, are desperate for that oil, so they're quietly starting to hedge their bets. Old partners in the Gulf, like Saudi Arabia, are looking elsewhere for security. And all those American bases in the region, they've gone from symbols of power to what Pape calls big fat targets for Iranian drones. The U.S. role as the security mafia boss of the region is crumbling.
This chart does a great job of showing the shift. For decades, the U.S. has been the lone superpower. China and Russia together pose a challenge, sure, but the scales still favor America. But what happens when you add a nuclear-armed, regionally dominant Iran to their side? For the first time, that balance could actually tip away from the United States.
So all of this brings us right back to that central idea. The United States is trapped. It has walked into a situation where every single move seems to make things worse.
And here is that impossible dilemma in a nutshell. If you keep bombing, you just make Iran more determined. But if you stop and pull back, you are handing a massive strategic victory to a major rival and admitting defeat. There's just no easy answer here.
So you have to ask, how on earth did we get stuck here? Well, according to Professor Pape, the starting point is crystal clear. He points directly to the 2018 decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. He argues that one move took all the constraints off Iran's nuclear program and started the chain reaction that led us to this impossible choice we face today.
And that leaves all of us with a final, really unsettling question. Are we just watching another conflict in the Middle East, or are we actually witnessing the moment the American-led world order begins to permanently give way to something new and maybe far more dangerous? The answer is being written as we speak.